The thing that men desire most, it's not status or money. Those are only a means to an end. I'm sure some of you will disagree with this, but the thing that men desire most is the very same thing that currently seems unattainable to so many of us. Because the thing that we desire so much, it's being gatekept. It's being held hostage by itself. Because, see, what it is that men desire most, it's sentient. It has its own desires that may or may not be at odds with our own. Okay, I'll cut the shit. I just felt like being prosaic for a minute. I've been reading a lot lately. But let me just say it plainly. The thing that men desire most is women. Specifically, love and affection from women. And now that women have unrestricted freedom of choice, it is very easy for women to use our desire against us in order to manipulate and control us. Now, that might sound obvious to some, but some of the main techniques that so many women use to control men, to control men's thoughts and actions, I promise you, some of these things are not so obvious. Most men will live their entire lives blissfully unaware just how many of their thoughts and feelings were actually placed there intentionally against their will. But this all goes deeper than just men and women. There are greater forces at play here. But if you really want to understand what it is that's going on here, first you need to understand how women control men on the individual level. Then we can zoom out and look at the bigger picture. So first we need to understand why women would even want to control men. Well, on an individual level, it's really pretty simple. Women are not physically strong compared to men. And they also tend to just not be very aggressive, at least not in the way we usually think of aggression. So historically effective means of acquiring resources, force, and physical dominance, those strategies are not viable for women. And I would also include physical labor in that. Acquiring resources through labor is also largely not viable for women. So men naturally are more capable than women when it comes to acquiring resources. And I think it's fair enough to go ahead and simplify that statement and just say men are naturally more capable than women at surviving. That is, when you think in terms of physicality. So in order to survive, and not just survive, but also to thrive in a world with limited resources, women's best bet is to control men, essentially convincing men to transfer to them the resources that they've attained through more natural physical means, which in a modern context, that means labor. And resources is really just a fancy way of saying money. If you really break it down, what we're talking about is how women manage to convince men to fork over their own hard-earned cash. Nowadays, of course, women can actually find employment more readily than men can, especially white-collar office jobs. And that's actually very important to remember when we zoom out a bit and start looking at the big picture. But for now, I just want to acknowledge that it is true that in modern society, women don't need to depend on a man to provide for them. But ultimately, that is the goal of most women. Even very career-driven women. Most women will happily quit their career to stay home and take care of the kids if they're able to lock down a man that earns more than they do. Okay, so one reason, and probably the biggest reason women seek to control a man's mind is to acquire resources or increase her standard of living, however you want to say it. Another reason is for attention or for bragging rights, just to feed the ego, essentially. Okay, so that's the why. Now let's talk about how women use men's desire against them. This video could be 1,000 hours long if we really wanted to go over each and every method of manipulation. So I'm just going to focus on a few of the more interesting methods that also aren't just completely obvious. Specifically, I'm going to be focusing on things women do to control you without committing to you even slightly, or necessarily even communicating with you directly. So this isn't ways that your wife manipulates you or your girlfriend. These are things that affect every man, including chronically lonely men like myself. The first technique women use to manipulate and control men is what I like to call intentional plausible deniability. One of the biggest ways they do this is with how they dress. You see this all the time where a woman will dress very provocatively with the intention of arousing men, but they'll do it in a way where they know they can deny it. So basically, they're able to sexually provoke men while still maintaining a good, modest reputation. For example, a woman will wear skin-tight yoga pants to the gym with very thin material, which is basically just as provocative as not even wearing pants at all. But if they did get called out on it, they know they can just say, well, I'm working out. I have to wear athletic clothes. I'm working out. And that excuse will work on 99% of people. Or a woman will wear yoga pants in the winter with a big puffy jacket as if she's not essentially leaving nothing at all to the imagination just because technically most of the surface area of her skin is covered up. Really, the ubiquitousness of yoga pants proves how common plausible deniability is. And I know you might be thinking, okay, water is wet. Women like to show off their body without being seen as a floozy. Big deal. Well, what I want you to understand, it's not just as simple as women trying to attract men. It's a mind control technique. What they're doing when they do this is they're intentionally arousing men, keeping men mentally distracted, because when you're around a woman that's dressed like that, if you're a man with at least normal testosterone levels, it is at least a little bit distracting. You can't help but look, and you can't help but think about it. Even later on, when you're not even around the plausibly, deniably, provocatively dressed woman anymore, there's a good chance you're going to randomly think about her. So what's happening here is they're dressing that way to maximize the mental space they are taking up in the maximum amount of men's minds. And the goal, which, by the way, women that are doing this might not always realize exactly what they're doing. I'd still say it's intentional because, at the very least, on a subconscious level, they do know what they're doing. But the goal is, there's just so many benefits a woman gets to occupying a sizable piece of real estate in as many men's minds as possible. She could possibly get the same effect by legitimately befriending all the same men, but that's so much less efficient. So the benefits are, let's say we're talking about a woman that dresses provocatively at the gym. If there was a fire in the gym and she got trapped in the locker room or something, it's guaranteed somebody's going to save her. Somebody's going to think of that yoga pants-did woman and they're going to think, I got to save that ass. That's kind of an extreme example, but let's say a creepy guy tries to hit on her and he won't leave her alone. Well, somebody's going to be a white knight and come to the rescue. Probably multiple guys. Now, both of those examples are very specific, but in practice, this is really more of a subtle, low-grade form of manipulation. It's kind of similar to how Coca-Cola will still put up billboards and random advertisements everywhere, even though everybody already knows about Coca-Cola. They're just trying to occupy as many minds as possible. That's why women wear yoga pants. And the vast majority of girls that play volleyball, they don't care about the sport. That's not why they join the team. They join the volleyball team so they can have a reason to wear the shorts. Oh, I wouldn't just wear something like this if I didn't have to. That's plausible deniability. Now, I'll get into it more later, but it's not just on the level where individual women are doing this to spread their own influence across the local male population. That is the basic mechanism the behavior propagates through. But all this mental warfare against men is being promoted at a higher level by powerful forces. But we'll get into that. Another mind control technique women use to manipulate men is artificial scarcity. And what I mean by that is scarcity of attention, scarcity of basic niceties. Just they severely limit any and all forms of positive social signals towards men. This is why you might have noticed it just seems very rare to even hear a woman say thank you these days. And when they do, it's often in a very detached way. Like they'll say the words, but they'll say it in a very dismissive way, not making eye contact, maybe even saying it while at the same time giving you a dirty look. That's actually an example of plausible deniability being used in combination with artificial scarcity. Now, you can say, well, women don't owe you kindness, but how hard is it to just be kind? It actually takes more effort to be rude or dismissive. I know for me, to not say thank you and actually mean it when someone does something like hold a door open for me, for example, that would take effort. Showing appreciation and being kind is just automatic. Obviously, that's going to vary person to person based on how they were raised. But I think for most people, it is just a part of human nature. We tend toward kindness, especially with these very low effort to no effort forms of kindness, like just saying thank you to someone that holds a door open for you. It's an evolutionary psychology thing. It's just a matter of existing together peacefully in a society. So what the mind control tactic is here, by intentionally withholding general pleasantries from men and intentionally acting cold and distant, what they're doing is they're alienating you. They're trying to demoralize you and make you feel worthless, make you feel like you're completely undesirable, or even just invisible. At the most basic level, individual women are creating this artificial scarcity just because they don't want any men approaching them that aren't the highest tier of the top 5% of the most desirable men, or whatever the case may be. But again, it is a form of mind control. It is a bit more sophisticated than just, well, I'll act cold toward this ugly guy here so he won't try hitting on me. The goal is more so to implant thoughts of total hopelessness into a man's mind. Because women act like this while also intentionally dressing provocatively, or even if they're not dressing a certain way, they know that men desire them. That's the whole basis for how women are able to control men like this. The fact that men biologically desire women. So they create artificial scarcity by especially just treating men poorly with this cold, dismissive behavior. Everything from closed off body language to refusing to say thank you, ignoring you when you say good morning. It's all sorts of things. But they do this to instill deep-seated thoughts of desperation into the minds of lonely men. And they do it because it puts themselves in an advantageous position in any dealings with men. And just like with the plausible deniability tactic, it isn't necessarily in the forefront of every woman's mind what they're doing. It may be a more subconscious thing, but on some level, they do know what they're doing. They're attacking our minds to try to influence how men think so they can influence how men behave. Okay, so here's where it gets concerning. Because yes, individual women do have their own incentives to want to control men, but all this is being promoted by more powerful forces, higher up. I'm not saying there's necessarily some grand conspiracy where the woman living next door to you is receiving top secret marching orders from some shady Men in Black type organization, but all this is promoted through media, social media, mainstream media, movies and music, and it feeds into itself too. It's part of the culture. I don't want to speculate too much on who it is exactly that's behind all this, I don't even necessarily think it's any one specific group. It could be as simple as it's just profitable for large corporations to have a heavily demoralized male population that also all think in the same way. Because the biggest goal in all this from a broader perspective, okay, fully zoomed out now, asking what is the reason women are being weaponized against men in this way, being used as agents of mind control against men. What is the reason? The main reason, I think, is norm enforcement. Norm enforcement. The idea is to keep men in line, keep men obedient to the cultural status quo. Because it benefits basically any powerful group you can think of. Government, large corporations, whatever, they all benefit from the majority of the male population all following a basic set of norms. It's all about keeping men demoralized and weak and unable to organize. That's the real key here. They want to keep men, by and large, in a state where we are unable to organize, unable to rebel, unable to take the steps that we would need to take to make the world a better place for ourselves. It's all about the powers that be trying to maintain their own positions and not have to worry about being overthrown. So they use women to police the men, to keep us lonely and desperate, keep us not only in a state so far from actualization that we're not having our basic physical and emotional needs met, but they also want us to be completely and utterly hopeless that we'll ever be able to get into a position where our needs are being met. Okay, if you're still not getting it, what I'm talking about is the fact that physical intimacy and affection from women is a need for men. If you don't have that, then you're basically not eating. Okay, you are missing out on basic nourishment for your mental health. Just like you need certain vitamins or proteins for your physical nourishment, you need to be doing certain physical processes and you need emotional connection to have proper nourishment for your mental health. It all plays into something maybe some of you have heard of before. It's something called mate suppression. At the end of the day, that's what all this is about, mate suppression. Whether it's an organized effort by some shadowy group or it's just the collective efforts of millions of individual women, certain men, that being men that are low status and not extremely attractive, which is most men, we are being mate suppressed. We are being prevented from reproducing. We are being locked out of what historically has been a normal occurrence for average men. Romance, female affection, basic validation that we are worthy of love. We're being locked out of all of this. I think there's a multitude of reasons why that would be beneficial for wealthy elites or whoever it is that's already at the top. I mean, if you think about it, it's pretty simple to reason out that if nothing else, it just keeps more women available for themselves. But I think the bigger reason for mate suppression is control. If the masses of low status regular men are just so hopeless and demoralized and desperate, there's just no time to organize a revolution. And think about it. If regular guys can't get any action in real life, a lot of guys, probably most, are going to turn to porn. And it's really, really easy to get hooked on that stuff. And that's a good way to keep a man distracted and docile. And it's not just adult content. Lonely, desperate men are prone to turn to any number of vices. Weed is another big one. Alcohol too. And of course, opiates as well. Fast food, processed, frozen dinner slop. That's another vice that lonely, desperate men are liable to turn to for comfort. All of these things make a man more docile and less likely to make anything of himself, less likely to challenge the status quo. So there's a chain here from women enacting certain behaviors to influence men's thoughts and actions weaponizing men's desire against them. And women are choosing to do these things on an individual level for their own personal benefit. But these women are also being influenced themselves by the predominant culture, which is all propagated through mainstream media and social media. The media, of course, probably being controlled by wealthy elites or large corporations or governments or all of the above. And of course, this is very effective because women are very agreeable to the mainstream. So in this way, women are being weaponized as agents of mind control to demoralize men and create a populace of men that essentially it's an underclass of lonely, desperate men that are all being mate suppressed. And we're all fucked, and the whole world is shit. Something else I wanted to talk about just briefly. I mentioned earlier how women can get jobs these days much more easily than men can. Well, that's true, as I'm sure you know if you've been at all conscious in this world for the past 2 decades. And I think that's intentional. I think it's part of the mate suppression agenda. They empower women at the expense of men to further give women the power to commit mind control techniques against us. Why do you think society is so gynocentric? Why is feminism the #1 most important cause for the past 50 freaking years all across the Western world? Even now, when we are well beyond the point of parity, women have all the institutional power already, and men have none, yet the powers that be still beat the drum of feminism. Still talking about women are oppressed, we need to support women, and everything like that. Why is that? What is that? It's mate suppression. It's all in support of mate suppression and mind control. If you found anything I said here insightful, or even if you just found it intriguing, please consider watching some of my other videos. There's also some secret videos you can watch for free on my Patreon, videos that YouTube doesn't want you to see. So check that out. No sign up required. Thank you for watching. I'll see you next time.